For this video, I'm going to show you how to apply fur to a skinned character or a rigged character. There's two different ways to do it, probably more than that, but I'm going to show you the two main ways. Each one has caveats, so I'm going to let you decide which one's more appropriate for you. So the first way I'm going to show you is, let me open up this bunny model that was modeled by one of my students. And it's like a little stuffed animal. I tried applying two different ways to this, and both of them had issues because this model actually has issues, and I can't quite figure out why. Something about the way it's modeled causes some tearing and causes the fur to apply or show up differently. So that means that at some point we're going to have to go back and retopologize this using quad draw. But for now I'm going to go ahead and show you the ways that it can mess up so that if you see it you'll understand what you need to do to fix the problem. So for this particular model, I'm going to go ahead and leave it as is. It could probably use some more joints for if we were going to actually rig it and it worked. But I'm going to show you the first way to apply fur, and then we'll try rigging it. So the obvious way for or at least the old way, was to use paint effects for the fur. And to do that, you set up modeling. We have to make this model a surface that we can actually paint on. So if you select Generate, usually this is where you'll do your Xgen hair or fur, but you can also use paint effects from here. So we're going to make this model paintable. And the next thing we want to do is find a fur as a starting point that would be appropriate to paint on this model. So if you go under Windows, Content Browser, and from here, this is a bunch of different demos of all kinds of different things. So there's sculpting base meshes you can use to start as a starting point for models. There's vehicles, there's shading, there's effects, particles, things like that. Play around with it. You can open up some of these as Maya scenes, but the ones we're interested in for this demo are actually the paint effects brushes. So in this, you get a bunch of different paint strokes and brushes that you can use in paint effects. The one that we're interested in is in the hair subfolder, and then there's this little fur bunny brush stroke. So if we take that, you notice that when I selected that, it brought up the paintbrush tool over here. If I apply that, now that the bunny is paintable, you see I can actually paint fur on the object. Now, one of the issues here is that the bunny is too small for the fur, so we could change the fur and make it longer and shorter. We can change the global scale like that. And if we change the global scale, then you actually see where the stroke starts to show up. So keeping it high allows it to sort of spread out. And then you can actually change the display quality if you have trouble rendering like the full display on the in the shader 2.0 or the viewport 2.0 right here. So it's set for like 30% to give you a rough approximation. If you crank it all the way up to 30%, you'll see how many hairs it's actually drawn. So the advantage of paint effects hair or fur is that it renders really quickly, and it will also render using the default Maya rendering. So if we just say render, and I'm going to leave it set it is right now, it's using the Maya software renderer. We're going to render the current frame, and you see it gives this paint effects fur. It looks really good. Now the issue with this is that if I apply a light, we'll create a spotlight or a directional light, and we will turn this on. Go ahead and turn on lights and shadows. Now just because I've turned on lights and shadows in the viewport doesn't mean that I'm going to get lights and shadows on the fur. If you want to try, and we can see if we're going to get lights and shadows, is we go under render and render settings. The default render settings don't automatically render shadows for Maya software. So you have to go under the Maya software tab. Right now the quality is set for custom. We can set it for like contrast sensitive production. which will crank up the sampling rates. But the one that we're interested in, if we want to see if it'll render shadows, is ray tracing quality. Turn on ray tracing, and you'll see it's casting 10 shadow rays now. So that should, if we crank up the bias here, it'll give it a softer shadow. That should, if this is going to render shadows, it should render them then. So let's try rendering that. And you can tell it's not casting shadows. So that's the downside of Maya Paint Effects Fur, is that you can't automatically render shadows with it. So the issue can be solved if we convert this to Polygons. So I'm going to leave it at its default setting here. Select this paint stroke, go under Modify and Convert, and then you're going to do Paint Effects to Polygons. And we'll click on the menu here just to show. So then there's the, you can hide the strokes, that's fine. Vertex color, all of this, all the defaults will be fine. We don't have to worry about quad output. So go ahead and convert. And it's going to convert that paint stroke. You notice how it looks different. It's going to convert those paint strokes to polygonal objects now. And if we render it, it should now cast shadows. It's going to take a minute to render because you can see where the fur is now casting shadows. And just to kind of highlight the point, we'll change the directional light a little bit more to give it sort of a long shadow cast and actually see if it'll self-shadow too. So render. Now the downside, obviously, to converting these fur, this fur to, you can see it's got a nice shadow casting. The downside is it's a lot of polygons. So if I select that, just the default settings for the fur came out to 100,000 triangles, or 100,000 faces. So you can imagine how many faces it would take to cover this entire model. The other downside is that if you make those faces in terms of fur, got some weird issues here. I don't know if it clipped them because of the count or what, but we'll fix this in a sec. The other downside is that if you were going to go and try to paint weights on this, it can be very difficult to paint weights across like minute objects like this, because you have to be able to obviously paint across every polygon in order to adjust the weight. So it's not the greatest option. I mean, it can look really good. I'm going to go ahead and show you. Let's go ahead and turn the light off for a sec. I'm going to show you ways to optimize that polygonal output though. So we'll go back to our paint stroke and we'll paint across the face. Alright, so again, now we're back to just the default paint effects strokes, but there's ways to optimize them for output. So one of the things you'll notice if you click on this Fur Bunny tab in the Attributes Editor is the tubes, and then creation, and you'll get this tubes per step, and then tube width. Segments is one of the ones that we're interested in. So segments, I'm trying to find a way to look at this. If you look at this fur, it's segments is actually the number. You see how these little lines along here are increasing or decreasing? Segments is the number of segments along the tube. So 3 is usually, it's going to give you a rough, like 4 might be a good count for that in terms of the number, so you can still get kind of curved hair. The other thing to check out is the let me find it. There's a cross-sectional polygonal count too, which is maybe under strokes. And can't remember where this one is. Let's see. just to give you an idea, like this display quality right now it's got, what it really accounts for is the amount of hairs that are being shown here. So if I crank that up, that's the number that are really there. That's why the poly count was so high when we converted it. Changing this isn't going to change the output. The way you can change the output is if I take this and make it 100%, and I want to see cut it down, you can go under mesh output. Oh, sorry, go back under fur bunny, and in the it's in the pressure mappings here. So it's a weird place for it. It's under the stroke fur bunny. So the pressure mappings, you're going to see this tubes per step. Right now it's set for like 0.2 and then 1.5. That's 1.5 tubes per step along the stroke. So it's creating that many tubes. You can crank this down, and that's going to eliminate some of these hairs. So you can get it down to the point where it's enough hair to give you the idea of fur, and you can actually see some of the mesh, the underlying mesh through it, because you can always cover that up with a texture. But it's enough to just give you the illusion of a fur without necessarily all of the rendering that goes along with it, because really what you care about is like that cross section from the side. And then the rest of this can be hidden. So then if we took that and go create polygon, modify, convert paint effects to polygons, then we'll just get that number, and now we're down to 21,000 tries, which is still a lot, but it's a lot less than 100,000 for covering the face. And you can see it looks pretty good for as far as hair goes. I'm going to undo that and leave it at hair stroke. I'm going to crank up I'm going to leave that for now. We'll go ahead and show you the issues that you might have with this based on the actual model having issues. So we'll select this stroke. One thing to think about too is I've changed this particular stroke, but if I go on to paint another, I'm going to get back to that super dense hair. Notice that it had an issue and it only applied on the end. That's one of the things I was talking about with this model having an issue with fur. Is something about the model is off. I'm not sure quite what. Parts of it I can paint fine, and then other parts, if I drag across, it looks like it's going to apply, but it'll only apply oddly. So and that's where we'll have to get into the retopologizing the model, and I'll show you how to do that in a sec. But the thing I wanted to cover is, like, because I'm doing another new stroke now, this option doesn't apply to it now. So if I take this and I want to cut that back again, I have to go and change the actual tool settings in the mappings here in order for this to count. So like if I change this, let's see what this one was. So this one was 0.06 and 0.092 on the tubes per step. So if we change this to 0.06 and 0.092, and it's a little light. Depends on how far you paint it across the stroke. Let's leave it at 0.264. We can select the tool here and change this in the actual stroke in the tool settings using this hammer menu tool to bring it up. We can change that to that setting 0.264. So now when we paint, it'll only paint that light stroke amount like that, and that way you get a more accurate idea of how much fur is actually on the model. So I'm just painting these strokes to kind of cover his face. Like that. Notice again I got this weird jump because I painted across some bad topology. I said we're going to fix that, but I don't want to do it yet. I want to show you how it affects it on the Xgen stuff. Alright, so let's say we've got his fur painted complete now. We wanted to rig him. we can, the cool thing is we don't have to select these tubes or anything about them to rig them. We can just select the model. I'm going to use the quick rig tool here. Using the little kinematics guy right here, this icon, bring up the quick rig tool and then select quick rig tool, and I'm going to do the step by step. You have to add the mesh first step, so I'm adding that P-cube shape 1. I'll leave all of this set to that, and then I'm going to go ahead and create the guides. Now you can see what it did for these guides is kind of way off, because like here's the knees up in the belly, so that you can fix that. You can pull it down and actually put it in his leg. And then I'm going to use the mirror icon here to mirror it across. Same thing with his ankle. And the foot, bring it out a little bit. Toe box, I mean. Here's the hip. And you can see if you select it, you'll see it appear up here in the title, but you can also see it when you select it, you'll see it highlight in the hypergraph under Windows, hypergraph hierarchy. You can just click on this little select icon and you'll see I've selected the hips here. So as I go and change each one of these, I can see which bone I've clicked on, because sometimes they'll actually kind of get to the point where you can't tell which bone's what, so you want to make sure that you put the right bone in the right place, particularly like the clavicle and the shoulders. So we're going to make his hip bone, put it in the hip, mirror it across. This one is the back. We'll pull it down to here. Don't have to mirror that. This is back 1. Pull it to there. And this is probably shoulders. Yep. Pull that down. And I'm guessing these are the clavicle. So we'll pull that forward a little bit. And mirror it, pull it out some, mirror it. Here's the shoulder, make sure it's actually in the joint, then mirror that, and then the elbow, mirror that, and the wrist. And then you're left with the neck and the head. And we'll just pull that down a little. We'll say that's good, and we'll go ahead and apply. I'm going to create the bones. So that creates and centers a rig scaled based on those guides. And then you have to finally, to get it to go, you have to skin it. So we'll go ahead and create a skin. You can mess around with the settings before you skin it, but I'm just trying to give you the idea. So now we take this and move it. It's got all kinds of skinning issues, but you can see that the hair moves with the head. So that's how you rig a Paint Effects shaded or fur model. Obviously we'd have to go on paint skin weights to get this to work, to get it to be rigged correctly. And like I said, there were issues in terms of being able to get the ears, fur on the ears and stuff, because of the way the model's made. One way, let me go back and undo all that. One way we could get this, let's go to Windows Hypergraph. We'll also delete all by type history. And I'm going to delete these two character rigs. One way we could fix this, I'm not sure if I can apply it after the fact now that I've got some paint strokes on here, but we could actually do maybe like a modeling and a mesh smooth. Let's see if it goes. It may crash. Alright, let's see. I'm going to crank it up or not. Actually, I think it may have crashed. Yeah, it's one of those things where doing, okay, it actually went. It just took a while to bogging down my machine while I'm recording and trying to do all this, but also too I'm doing things out of order. So I've got this super dense rabbit mesh now. As you can see, 243,000 polygons. I'm going to go ahead and take a countdown. Let's leave it at 2 and see if that fixes, because that might fix the ability to paint on the ears. We'll just give it a shot and see. So I need to go and get my paint effects tool again. So curve, sorry, I'm under modeling, generate, paint effects tool to get that back. And we'll try painting across the ear here. So it works a little bit better. One thing about the tool is it's a little bit wide. So you see how it's sort of painting too wide. You can obviously you could just fix that with the editor and the global scale. Just take that down. Let's find it here. Take the global scale down to make it fit a little bit better. But you can also see that there's some gaps. So one thing we can do if we want to transfer this going forward to all of the strokes is get this setting. So if you go under generate, and with this stroke selected, you can get settings from selected stroke, which should now then, it allows me to apply those settings. And you can see there's something weird going on here. So yeah, like doing the little fix on the ear in terms of the mesh subdivision didn't fix the problem. You can see where it's starting to try to stretch things through. It fixed it a little bit, but there's a gap here that for some reason it just doesn't like. It doesn't want to paint anything on. So that's why we have to go and do the retopology. So that's about as far as I can take this one. That's Paint Effects version of fur and rigging it. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new scene so we can lose all this. I'm going to open up that same rabbit into this, or bunny. Now, the second way of applying fur is to use generate. This Xgen editor, whoops, wrong one, sorry. Generate Xgen editor, and you'll get this cool little interface over on the side, the Xgen tab. And if it doesn't have a description, fur description or grass description or whatever Xgen object description it already on the model, then it'll get this. You'll get this cool interface. You can import a preset from the library. Select, and then you'll pick from one of these presets. They're not quite the same as the options for paint effects, and I found that this duckling is probably the closest thing to what the bunny fur looked like. So I'm going to apply that, double click on it with the object selected, and you'll notice it's going to just ask you to create a new description name. So I'll import that. I just went with the defaults. And now it's gone and applied that fur to the object overall. So you can tell it's obviously too furry. So if I scale this object up, and I could also scale the fur down in terms of the length, but that might change the way it looks as far as the curliness and things. So now that I've scaled that, you can still see the fur, but it didn't move with the object. In order to see it, how it meshes with the new object, you have to click on this eye, update the Xgen preview right there. And that looks pretty good. And you can see it's sort of applying these random options across the model. Let's go a little bit bigger on the model. Scale that up and then do update. All right, update. Okay, so obviously I need some more density in the model, so we'll crank this up to like 500. And this is where you start to see the issues show up again because of the topology. You can tell that the direction, somehow the topology is causing the fur to go in different directions based on something to do with the model. I'm not quite sure what, but we'll go ahead and render this, and this will show you one of the first downsides to Xgen. If you try to render Xgen using not animation, rendering, try to render it using basic Maya, it's not going to render the fur. You have to set it to render with mental ray in order to render Xgen fur. So I set it to the mental ray, and then you'll also notice Xgen's a good bit slower than Paint Effects in terms of rendering. So one of the things I want to do to make this render better and to show you the advantages is that Xgen fur will actually shadow as well. So if I go under render settings and options, I can go to scene. I'm going to go ahead and create like a physical sun sky, which will turn on a bunch of environmental lightings and crank up the rendering quality. So I'm going to create that. Let me go ahead and hide this, and that creates this sun direction. Yeah, sun direction option somewhere. Oh yeah, because I started a new scene, I lost the previous sun, so now I can just change that sun direction. And it also creates like a blue sky type shader and gives you some global illumination. So if I render this now, you should see that that the fur has shadows. So you can see it changed the way the render looks. Sec. You can tell it takes a lot longer to render now. But you can also see that, you can see that the fur casts shadows and self shadows. So that's an advantage. All right. So one of the things about this Xgen is that it needs polygonal density or topology in the model in order to know how to split up or create these patches of fur. So the first thing we can do, just to show you a difference and really try to highlight the problems with this particular model and why we need to retopologize, is we'll delete this collection of fur. I'll take and in modeling, I will smooth the mesh. Go 3. Yep, 3. And now we'll import that preset and apply it. It's going to take a second. And you can see it's a lot denser now, but you can also see there's something going on in terms of like there's this checkerboard quality to the fur. So if I render this, and this comes from the something that's going on with the actual model itself, the way it was modeled. So render the current frame. It's going to take a minute because more polygons, more fur obviously means more render time. You can tell it's taking a good bit. What are some of the advantages of the Xgen fur, and there are a lot, is that you can actually style it, you can groom it, you have all these grooming modifiers, you can put twirls on it, you can change colors, you can use maps to change the pattern on it. It's just really very controllable. So it's worth exploring. It's far superior in terms of being able to use it with a Maya model and rigging it, and then being able to create some pretty realistic looking fur. It works much better, so it's worth the extra weight and rendering time. So I'm going to let this render, and I'll show you what it looks like. Hopefully the patterning shows up, and I'll show you ways to maybe get around that in case you don't want to go and do a retopology using the quad draw. Because it may actually work, although I can kind of tell there's these dark patches in it right now. It's hard to tell what comes from the actual fur description in terms of noise and what comes from just the modeling or the way the model's made. But I'll show you ways to hopefully compensate for that too and see if we can fix it without having to do the retopology. So it's doing this, when you see this patterning going on, it's probably because it's doing like global illumination, which is giving it even more realism, and looks really good on the fur. So it's just this drawing pattern that it does, where it does some sampling of the scene and bounce lighting. Okay, it's going through the final pass. Yeah, you can see the twist and stuff that comes from the difference in the topology for some reason. Now, obviously, it's still better than what was going on with the Paint Effects fur, because it actually covers the entire ear, and you're not getting that tearing and stretching. Plus, it's kind of automatic in terms of the way it applies. That said, you can see there's some weirdness to it in terms of the way it's changing direction. Kind of looks really rough, and it's getting this swirl pattern going. So we're going to play around and see if we can adjust that. I may still show the retopology even if we can adjust it. But let's just see how it renders out. It's almost there. Not quite sure why it does this lower small sample and then goes big. It's relatively new. Couple more. There we go. All right, so you can see like there's fur going this way, that way, and it's mapped in this sort of square pattern. Like you can see there's a hard edge here, and it's the fur's going one way, and then up here it's going a different way, and then this one's going a different way, and then this one's going a different way. So I'll play around with trying to fix that. One of the things I've found that can help, and you can see that same pattern in the real-time preview right here, right? Hopefully you can see like a darks patch here, light patch here, light patch here. So one of the things I found that can try to help with that, and before I get into that, if you have issues with the number of fur in terms of the quality or the density showing up and slowing your machine down, you can take this percent count, this preview settings percent count down, and just crank down the number of hairs that are being drawn. Notice that it kind of looks weird, but that's because I was doing it while I was zoomed in on it. If I do preview, it'll show everything again. That doesn't actually change the render, it just changed the real-time preview. So you can kind of see, and you can also see that in doing this, I'm getting these weird low counts across the mesh, and that's probably got something to do with what I was seeing in terms of the, because there seems to be a pattern to it, in terms of what I was seeing with the fur looking strange across the model. Let's go ahead and crank that up a little bit so I can still see. And then one of the things you can play with is this tilt in and around in, which are a high number. Let's try making it like -10. And notice that kind of cleaned it up a little bit. And then we'll make the around in sort of like -2. And then update that and see if that helps with the render. So we'll render again. Take a second. Alright, so it looks like, seems like it still has some issues. Let me try one more thing to fix this. But you can kind of see it helped in spots, but at the same time, it kind of caused other things to occur, like this, whatever's going on here in terms of this blotchy patch. Might be the facing camera option, I'm not sure. But one of the things we can do to try to fix that is that there's this setting. Once this is done rendering, let's see what it looks like big. See where it's sort of exposed here and here, a little bit on the, and then here in the body. It seems like it helped parts of it. It's looking better for sure. There's a setting under, let's see, this compensate normals and then compensate for uneven parameterization. So if we do that, it's going to give us a warning and say create parameterization map. Okay, so I gave a warning and saying that search for path, it couldn't find anything. So we're going to go ahead and create a map that's going to be used to compensate for uneven parameterization across the surface. So we'll go ahead and create that. It's going to go and calculate a density compensation map. Take a sec, and it should redistribute the hair. Alright. Now if we try doing a render again, let's see if it fixed that problem. Otherwise we'll have to drop back to doing a retopology of the mesh using the quad draw. So it's going to take a minute to render. Oddly, now it's rendering quite large. I don't know why. And it looks like it might have started to solve that problem. We'll see when it gets up around the chest. Part of it is that, you know, if you try to draw enough fur to where you can't actually see through to the skin, you're rendering way too much fur. It just doesn't need to be that much. So I recommend if you're going to do a furry character, you actually come up with the a look of the fur as a texture map to put under the skin so that it doesn't actually show through. Or you could actually like create like a pinkish skin and allow that to show through. Usually, yes, the fur on an animal is so thick that you can't actually see the skin unless you pull the fur and make it part. But you don't need to be rendering that much fur. It'll take forever, and it really isn't going to look, it won't look any better than what you see with the lower count. In fact, some ways the lower count will look better. And for this particular use case, we're talking about a stuffed animal, which is going to be a much lower hair count than an actual animal's fur would have anyway, so it makes sense to do it with a texture map. Can't really tell if the compensation map actually helped. It looks like it helped some, but I can't tell if it fixed the topology issues I was seeing. But if it's close, I'll probably go with that so I don't have to go into the whole quad draw, because that can take a while. And I have a video on retopology. You should check it out if you have any questions about how to use quad draw to retopologize a mesh. It looks to me like, I don't know, once it finally gives you the smooth version, it's hard to tell. I think I'm going to leave it though for now and just rig it and show you how it works and avoid the whole topology. I did a version of this video already. Unfortunately, it didn't capture the actual render windows. I was having some issues with my recording software, and doing a retopology definitely helped. Using the quad patch drawing tool in the tools tool menu, and setting the bunny to be a live object using this magnet tool right here. And then doing the retopology, a lower poly count across the entire mesh, made it much made the fur much more normal looking. You don't get any of this swirling going on and stuff. I'm not quite sure why that happens on this particular mesh, but something to be aware of if you ever see this is if you see this and you don't like the effect and you want to figure out a way to change it, then just go and use that mesh as an actual live object and then retopologize it. Just draw the quads across it and make it a completely new skin, watertight, and it should work fine. And then one way you can test that is if you just create a sphere and apply this exact same description to it, you'll see it renders very smooth and doesn't give you any of these warped, kind of twisted sections with these patchy spots of fur. That said, I'm going to show you how to change the color, and then we'll actually just render, we'll rig it and call it done. So if you want to change the color for this, you have to go into the expressions, and you have 3 expressions. There's this float mouse fur noise, color down color, and then float fur noise. And the float fur noise is like, differences in length and things like that. But if we want to make this like a white rabbit fur, we'll just go and change all of these colors to white. And notice that their values are a little bit down, so I'll crank them up some just to give it more of a white rabbit look. So now I can go and rig it. Let's see, and for the purposes of rigging, I'm going to actually take the preview and crank it all the way down, just so I can see what I'm doing. Won't affect the render quality, but I'll turn that back up when I'm done with the rigging. So I'll go ahead and rig. Use the quick rig tool, and step by step, I'll add that mesh, create my guides, and I'll have the same issues as before where I have to move them into place. I'm going to be pretty lazy about getting this just right, but I'm going to flip that across, pull this foot down. Actually, the one that I just moved is the knee. So there's the toe, and the knee. Yep. And then the hip. Thigh, I mean. This is the hip, going down to the center. Spine. Back. That's shoulders. And these are shoulder. Oh, that's shoulder and that's clavicle. So the shoulder can go here. Clavicle can come down and be here. Let's flip that. Shoulder. The elbow. And the wrist. That's good. Flip that. Here's the neck. And the head. Alright. I think, yeah, that looks good. So we'll go ahead and create the bones. And rig it. Now, before I rig it this time, because the other one had so many issues, I'm going to try to make the rigging settings a little bit better for this particular model. So I'll use the default settings, but I'll go in and change some things. So I only want like 3 influences. That'll help me clean it up a little bit. And skinning method, classic linear is fine. Fall off. I'll go with a higher resolution. I'm going to do a lower fall off. Try to get it to blend, and hopefully these won't cover So we'll go ahead and bind, oops, apply, create. All right, now let's see how that works. Well, we'll take the hand here, this little secondary rig, character rig. It's better than what it was, but you can see where there's issues in terms of the bind. So one of the ways I fix that is I'll get the object in a pose, and using that pose, I'll go and clean up the skin weights. So if you go under rigging and skin, paint skin weights, then we can take the hips, which is kind of low. I think hips. And I'll select this lower quality brush and just paint. I don't want to smooth, I want to replace. I want to go high on the value, and you see that it starts to clean up a little bit for the hips. We want this tail to be applied to the hips for sure. So my settings made the cranking down the fall off kind of made it a little bit rough. So maybe go with the default settings and then work from there. So then you can do a smooth. Go into the left leg, and you can see I don't need all this up here, so I'll go ahead and fill that with black to clean it up. Although I'll go with a solid brush for that, so I don't have any question marks about it being applied. Accidentally applied some on the leg, so undid. Let's look at the left leg, left foot. We'll smooth all that out in a second. Then the right leg, we'll get rid of that. Up here in the waist, that's all good. Spine, it's probably fine. Let's do some smoothing. The main thing I'm seeing is that the arms are affecting the arms are actually affecting the chest, which they shouldn't be. We can fix that when we get to them. Now this spine too is really tight for some reason. It should actually wrap around, so we'll go ahead and use this lower value brush here and do a replace with white and go around under the arm. And then blend it or smooth. Then when we get to the shoulder, obviously too much of it's affecting the head and down here on the arm. So we'll go with replace and black. And that smaller brush still too. And left arm, and this is where you'll see the issue right here is this. And the same on the head. Because the arm should only affect the arm. The shoulder, it's okay if it bleeds over a little bit, but the arm should only really affect right up to the elbow. So I accidentally painted some, whoops, my brush is too big. So how can I fix that? Let's do this. And then we'll come back and take the value, and replace it across here. See, I'm accidentally getting some bleed through on the arm there. Undo. I'll smooth that. Notice I'm clicking multiple times to get the smooth to really be smooth. Takes a couple of iterations for it. And I'll take it and go back to black here. Must have some effect coming from the forearm. Nope. Let's try the neck. Neck doesn't need to apply, it doesn't need to hit the ears, so I can paint all of this black. Kind of rough, but doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be close. Alright, and then the head, we do want all white. And the ears. Accidentally hit the arm. Not being super careful here, but just trying to get the parts that matter. We'll get that smooth. So I got some bleed across the surface here, but it'll smooth out if I give it enough. Part of it's that my arm's getting in the way, my brush is too big. Which, if you want to change the size of the stroke, you can go down here under stroke and just make this first radius use smaller, and then you can paint tighter on the brush like that. Gives you a bit more control, especially down here in the neck area where everything's coming together. So let's go, speaking of the neck, let's go and make that have a value and paint out everything else so that we can then slowly replace it with an and then the shoulders, left arm, across the top. I'm just getting it roughly right, and then the right arm. Left shoulder, where's my right shoulder? Right arm, there we go. So you can see on the right arm I've still got a lot of issues around the waist. Alright, so now once I have that, I can smooth it. And this would actually be a much easier process too if I'd gone and done the retopology as well. So again, sometimes it's better to just bite the bullet and go back and redo the model. Left arm, still got some going on in the back here, so I need to alright. and then smooth. Alright, and the head, or the neck. So this neck, I can start to get a little creative here. I'm going to do replace and make my opacity somewhere down low and slowly replace it. So I can get in tight. Gonna crank that up a notch. Alright. Smooth it. Oh, smoothing needs to be at full opacity. My shoulders are all off now. Right shoulder, yeah, so where I've painted and replaced, I've lost some control. One of the things I've noticed, and you'll notice this too because it happens consistently, is that when I go and reapply all these weights, invariably some of the weights actually ended up getting applied to the toe bases, the right toe base and the left toe base. So if you do see that, just go and fill black across. Didn't do it this time for some reason, but something's going on there. What is it? Left foot? Nope. Right leg, maybe it's the head. Neck, smooth that. It's gotta be the head. Yeah, the head right there. So with that, we'll do replace. Yep. And this is where the toe box might end up getting applied because you can see, even though I'm filling this with black, something still is hitting it. See what it is. So that would be neck. And we'll check the toe base again. It's lifted. It's got to be in the arm, I guess. Let's see, spine. So you can see I've got some weirdness going on here. Smooth. Just gotta go. Okay, it's this, the spine. So they replace and the value and go with something. Alright, this is taking longer, I think, because I got creative and tried to change or modify the settings, and it actually made it worse. what I'd been seeing before is that it was giving me way too much control. There were too many bones assigned, and it took a while to edit those. But this is even worse. Okay, so then the shoulder, left arm, shoulder. So like now I have like no control in the shoulder area. That's fine for now. Let's get to the head, left arm. Needs a little more white, especially around there. Smooth it. I'm not going for perfect on this. I just want to get it, especially since it's covered in fur. We don't really need perfect. The main thing is this head needs some work. Replace. Yeah. Coming around now. It's looking pretty good. Neck. Do that. Smooth it. Hopefully that'll help give us some more control in this area where it's getting a little rough. And part of this, again, is that there's just so much topology in this thing because I didn't retopologize. It's really hard to get the mesh weights painted where you get this super dense geometry right here. That's also going to create lots and lots of issues with the fur, even with that reparameterization map. I'm going to paint this out. Smooth that. Neck. Spine, yeah, that's trying to figure out where it's getting applied now. Alright, it's pretty good. It's not great for sure, but I don't know if I can get much better with this particular model without doing a retopology. Head looks good. And alright, so now that that's rigged for the most part, we'll take the Xgen and crank the percent shading up just to kind of show you that now it's rigged. We can pose our model. And notice again the fur doesn't move, but as you update it'll shift, right? We'll do our head. And update. And we'll rotate back. There we go. And then if we render, alright, so going back over this, so if you see issues with the model, don't be afraid to retopologize using quad draw or drawing quad patches in the modeling toolkit. which is the things I was just fighting using the trying to get the weights painted, trying to make a shorter video. So make sure your mesh is good and clean. You'll see that it'll show up in little issues. One thing I like to do is just basically open a simple primitive like a sphere, low poly sphere, apply whatever fur or material effect I'm trying to apply to it, see what it looks like, because that's going to be your basic, good geometry. And then take the character or whatever you're trying to apply and apply the fur to that. And if you see issues, then that probably means there's something going on with the model, and you might need to retopologize. So the advantages of drawing, paint effects, which is why paint effects is sort of deprecated, but paint effects, you can do all kinds of cool effects painted fast. It's good for prototyping, but you won't be able to do shadows with it, and you have less control over it. You can't really style it. That said, one of the nice things, you can do the same thing with Xgen. Like you can convert Xgen hair to polygons too. But I don't know, I haven't done it as much, and the quality may not hold up. But the paint effects hair transfers pretty well, and you have a lot of control over how many polygons it has and the way it draws. So you might actually be able to take paint effects hair into a game engine easier than you might be able to take Xgen hair. The advantage of Xgen hair is that you can do all kinds of grooming and combing and things like that. It renders with shadows, which looks nice, and it's probably the main difference. You can control all kinds of you can control pretty much everything, and it doesn't actually have to be hair as well. Like you can also change the type of render to objects, patches, all kinds of things. So you can use Xgen to make forests using trees. You can use it to create flat planes that you'll then use, say like a fur texture to make it look even furrier without having to actually do individual fur threads or hairs. So play around with that. That's pretty much this tutorial. Like I said, if you have any questions about how you might do retopology using the quad draw tools, check out my other video that has to do with Igor and retopology, and I'll go through the process with that. All right, that's it. And it's almost rendered here, so you can see what the final result looks like. Looks pretty good. It's not really, can't really tell that's a rabbit per se, but maybe if you saw him animated, he might be. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.